What if I told you that the most powerful man in the room just dropped a number so massive that it could literally reshape the entire North American economy overnight? $2.8 trillion. That is not a typo. That is not clickbait. That is the actual number that just came out of Donald Trump's mouth, and he directed it straight at Canada. But here is where the story takes a wild turn. The new Canadian leader, Mark Carney, did not simply push back. He did not just say no. He delivered a response so sharp, so brutal, and so calculated that even Trump's closest allies are reportedly speechless right now. And what happened in the last 60 seconds of this confrontation has financial experts, economists, and political strategists talking like we have never seen before. Stick around because I am about to break down the entire confrontation, the numbers behind the demand, and exactly what Carney said that has the global economy buzzing today. Now, if you are new to this channel, we specialize in breaking down the biggest financial moves, political showdowns, and global power shifts before they hit the mainstream news. If you want to stay ahead of the curve, you need to pay close attention. Let me set the scene for you because context matters more than any flashy headline. It is a Tuesday morning, and most political analysts were expecting another routine day of diplomatic back and forth. Perhaps a few mild disagreements over trade routes or lumber tariffs. The usual minor irritations that come with neighboring countries with intertwined economies. The expectation was calm, predictable, almost boring. Wrong. At a press conference that was scheduled to discuss domestic policy, Donald Trump stepped up to the microphone and completely flipped the script. He looked directly into the cameras and demanded that Canada pay the United States $2.8 trillion. Now, for those of you keeping score at home, that number is not small. That is not even simply large. That is astronomical. To put it into perspective, Canada's entire gross domestic product is estimated to be around $2.1 trillion. In other words, Trump demanded that Canada hand over more money than their entire country produces in a year. Reportedly, the room went silent. Reporters exchanged bewildered glances as if to ask each other, "Did he just say that?" And Trump, being Trump, did not stop there. He began to lay out what he described as decades of unfair trade deficits, military protection costs, and what he portrayed as Canada freeloading off American prosperity for far too long. Here is something that you need to understand about Donald Trump. He does not simply throw out random numbers. There is always a method, a strategy to what he does, even if it seems chaotic. His team has reportedly spent months digging through decades of trade data. They came up with this figure by calculating what they claim Canada owes for NATO underfunding, trade imbalances stretching back to the 1990s, and even what they call intellectual property leakage. Whether you agree with that math or not is a different conversation entirely. The point is, Trump framed this as a debt that is long overdue. He said, and I am paraphrasing here, that America has been the bank for the world, and Canada has had its hand out for far too long. Powerful words. But then the twist arrived. Mark Carney. If you are not familiar with him, pay attention. This is not a typical political figure. Before taking office as Canada's leader, Carney ran two of the most powerful central banks in the world. He was the governor of the Bank of Canada and the governor of the Bank of England. This is a man who understands money, leverage, and global finance at a level that few people on Earth can match. So when Trump dropped this $2.8 trillion bombshell, the world waited to see how Carney would respond. Would he panic? Would he try to negotiate? Would he attempt to calm the situation? None of the above. Carney stepped in front of the cameras less than an hour later, and what he said was nothing short of devastating. He began calmly, which, in confrontations like this, is often far more dangerous than anger. He stated, and I am quoting directly from his statement, "America does not get to invoice its allies for the privilege of being allies." That single line sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles across North America and Europe. But he did not stop there. Carney went on to explain that if America wanted to play the accounting game, Canada was happy to play it too. He presented his own numbers, showing how many American jobs depended directly on Canadian trade. He discussed states such as Michigan, New York, and Illinois, where manufacturing and energy sectors would literally collapse without Canadian imports. He reminded everyone watching that Canada supplies approximately 60% of America's crude oil imports. 60%. And then came the knockout punch. He said, and I quote carefully, "If America wants to calculate debts, let us calculate the cost of the thousands of American companies that would go bankrupt within 6 months of a trade shutdown. Let us calculate the millions of American jobs that would vanish. Let us calculate who really owes whom." The delivery was cold, calculated, and absolutely brutal. Here is what makes this moment so significant. Carney did not just defend Canada. He flipped the entire script and placed the economic spotlight squarely on America. Essentially, he said, "You need us more than we need you." Many economists are now saying that he might actually be correct. We are talking about deeply integrated supply chains that cannot be undone overnight. Energy grids rely on Canadian power. Auto manufacturing depends on parts that cross the border multiple times before a car is fully assembled. You cannot simply undo decades of economic integration with a tweet or a press conference. At this point, we are at a standoff. Trump has made his demand publicly, which means backing down would be a significant political loss. Carney has responded just as publicly, drawing a line in the sand, and the entire world is watching to see what happens next. Markets are already reacting. The Canadian dollar dipped slightly in the morning, but recovered when traders realized Carney was not backing down. American stocks and sectors like automotive and energy are showing early signs of volatility. This is not political theater anymore. This is real money, real economic consequences. Why does this matter for viewers like you? Whether you are in the United States, Canada, or elsewhere, the decisions made in the coming weeks could affect the price you pay for gas, for cars, for lumber, and for virtually everything. Trade conflicts have a way of trickling down to everyday consumers faster than most politicians ever admit. You need to stay informed and understand the reality behind the headlines. That is exactly what we do here. Before moving to the next part of the story, I want to emphasize the strategic dimension. When Trump threw out the $2.8 trillion figure, many laughed. They assumed it was another off-the-cuff exaggeration. However, there is more to the story. Trump did not pull that number from thin air. His team worked for months, analyzing decades of trade data, military spending reports, and intellectual property claims. They added up every trade deficit since the year 2000. They calculated what they claimed Canada underpaid for NATO defense commitments. They even included something called structural economic advantage, essentially arguing that Canada benefited from proximity to the United States without compensating adequately. Now, is that math fair? Economists are divided. Some consider it creative accounting. Others consider it completely absurd. The concerning aspect is that Trump believes it, and when he believes something, he fights for it relentlessly. But Carney, remember, is not a politician whose only experience is campaigning or giving speeches. He ran the Bank of England during Brexit. He ran the Bank of Canada during the 2008 financial crisis. He has sat in rooms with the most powerful financial minds on the planet and prevailed. When Carney heard Trump's demand, he did not get emotional. He did not get defensive. He got strategic. And that is what makes him dangerous in a confrontation like this. Let me walk you through what Carney did next, because it is a masterclass in political and economic counterpunching. First, he went on Canadian national television and acknowledged Trump's statement directly. That was smart. Ignoring it would have made him appear weak. But then he did something unexpected. He thanked Trump. He actually said, and I am paraphrasing, that he appreciated the former president bringing attention to trade issues because it gave Canada the opportunity to educate Americans on how intertwined their economies truly are. Think about that. Instead of entering a shouting match, Carney turned it into a teaching moment. He explained that Canada is the top export destination for 34 American states. 34. That is most of the country. He went state by state. Pennsylvania and their natural gas exports to Canada, Ohio and their manufacturing parts for Canadian-assembled vehicles, Minnesota and their agricultural products that cross the border daily. He quantified the impact in terms of dollars, companies, and industries, making it personal for American viewers. Then he went for the jugular. He discussed energy, reminding viewers that the United States imports more oil from Canada than from every other country combined, including Saudi Arabia, Mexico, and Venezuela. The Keystone pipeline alone carries approximately 800,000 barrels of oil per day into American refineries, which were specifically designed to process Canadian crude. Switching sources overnight would be impossible and enormously expensive. Carney let that sink in. He said, and I quote, "If America wants to calculate debts, let us calculate the cost of heating American homes next winter without Canadian energy." Brutal. Absolutely brutal. Behind the scenes, things are just as tense. Sources close to both camps indicate that back-channel communications have already begun. Trump's team reached out through intermediaries to test Carney's willingness to negotiate. Carney's response was reportedly simple. "Tell President Trump to put his offer in writing with actual accounting, and I will respond in writing with actual accounting." In other words, stop the press conference theatrics and sit down like adults. That is a power move, showing that he is neither afraid nor willing to engage in media games. Meanwhile, the business community is quietly panicking. Automakers are preparing contingency plans for potential supply chain disruptions. Energy companies are reviewing export risk. Retailers are assessing tariffs on lumber, agricultural products, and other goods. The TSX in Canada initially dipped but recovered as traders recognized Carney's firm stance. American markets fluctuate as investors attempt to price in the risk of a full-blown trade war. Trade wars are not like conventional wars. There are no winners. When two deeply integrated economies start exchanging blows, everyone suffers. Factories reliant on cross-border parts slow down. Canadian producers lose income. Consumers on both sides face higher prices for goods ranging from groceries to electronics to automobiles. Prices for building materials, including lumber, would likely soar. This is not abstract. This is real life. What could happen next? Based on consultations with economists, political strategists, and government insiders, there are three likely scenarios. Scenario 1 is negotiation. Behind closed doors, both sides recognize that a trade war would be catastrophic. Trump's team proposes a working group to examine trade imbalances. The $2.8 trillion demand is recast as a discussion starter. Carney agrees to negotiations, insisting that Trump publicly acknowledges Canada as a vital partner. They reach an agreement with symbolic concessions, markets calm, and both leaders claim victory. This is the most optimistic and probably the most likely scenario if reason prevails. Scenario 2 is escalation. Trump doubles down, threatening tariffs on aluminum, lumber, and other goods. Carney retaliates with targeted tariffs on American products important to Trump-supporting states. Supply chains begin to break, jobs vanish, prices rise, and the blame game begins. Ordinary people on both sides suffer. This could happen if ego and political optics override economics. Scenario 3 is a wild card. A third party could mediate, Mexican leaders could intervene due to USMCA repercussions, or a different crisis could capture Trump's attention. These events could alter the trajectory, but Carney will be ready. This confrontation highlights a larger trend. Traditional diplomacy is breaking down. Leaders communicate directly through press conferences and social media, bypassing formal channels. This creates volatility and the potential for miscalculation. The $2.8 trillion demand is not really about money. It is about power, leverage, and messaging. Trade is not a zero-sum game. When the United States benefits, Canada does not automatically lose, and vice versa. Their economies are deeply interconnected. A trade war is not a boxing match. It is like two people in the same house setting fire to separate rooms and hoping the other suffers first. Everyone loses. What should you watch for in the coming weeks? Watch Trump's social media for specific tariff threats. Observe Carney's appearances to see which American industries he highlights. Monitor market movements for signals about investor expectations. Pay attention to business leaders' public statements. They often know something the rest of us do not. In summary, this is more than political theater. It affects your life, your wallet, your family budget, and the broader North American economic landscape. Out of the three scenarios, will Trump and Carney negotiate? Will a full trade war erupt? Or will something unexpected happen? Share your predictions in the comments. Engage with the conversation. We are living in an era of information overload. Everyone has an opinion. Here, we cut through the noise. We provide context, strategy, and an understanding of the real stakes behind the headlines. This is why staying informed matters. If you are not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button now. Turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the real stakes of this Trump-Canada confrontation. The more people who understand, the better the conversation we can have. Staying informed is the first step towards staying ahead. Thank you for watching. I appreciate your time, your attention, and your insights.